Hey there, Jam. I'm Ben Holmes, and this talk is about how everything is a shortcode. So if you don't know me, I'm B Holmes Dev on Twitter. I use whatever web framework looks the shiniest, and I'm maintaining a project called Slinkity, which you can follow over here. So what we're going to explore today is what shortcodes are, how they compare to our mental model of components like React, Vue, or Svelte, and using them everywhere through some practical examples like image optimization and islands architecture. So before we get into that, I want to go over some definitions. So first off, what is a shortcode? Well, it's a function that takes in a set of props and returns a string of HTML, like taking in the source and alt of an image and returning a stringified picture element that is optimized for your website. And these shortcodes are called at build time, so during the pre-rendering step, and they're often found in template static site generators like Jekyll from the olden days and Eleventy and Hugo. So then we get into, well, what is a component then? How does it differ? Well, it's still a function that takes in a set of props, but instead of returning a string of HTML build time, it's returning some framework-specific code that could be run during server rendering or on the client. And this is where they differ mostly, in that a component can ship some JavaScript alongside that markup to enable some state management, like bringing in a counter or show and hide interactions on dynamic sites or web apps like Next.js, SvelteKit, and more. So they're enabling sort of the future of what Jamstack can do. But in this narrative of components, I would argue that a key benefit of shortcodes has been lost. And that's this one, which is that they return a generic string of HTML at build time. And this means that shortcodes could solve universal problems that components aren't solving across the board, like an image component, for example. Well, if I want to optimize images and put a picture element on my page, well, if I'm using components, I have to have a React image component, a Vue image component, a Svelte image component, different frameworks of the same thing. But the beauty of a shortcode is that it's just a string of HTML. So if we invented, say, an image shortcode, well, we could solve image optimization across all of those frameworks. As long as they can set inner HTML, then we're good to go. So this talk is going to be about how we can empower shortcodes to enable your dream codes. Let's jump into some code. I have a simple example pulled up here, built using Eleventy. If you haven't heard of it before, it's a static site generator that's similar to Jekyll or Hugo in that it just takes in a set of templates and outputs some clean HTML and CSS. No JavaScript bundling required. And we're going to add on Slinkity to add some superpowers to our markup down the road. So I have an example pulled up here that was generated using the npm init slinkity command. So I encourage you to try that out to get a similar output on your system. And it'll generate 3 routes on our site. The first one is this index file that's just some markdown rendering the text that you see here. The second is a JSX file, and this is something that Slinkity unlocks for you, where you can use React as a templating language to output some similarly static HTML and CSS over on the /React route here. And the last piece is a deployment guide if you want to put this on Netlify or your service of choice down the road. So this is a simple site with a lot of text. I kind of want to spice it up with some images, you know. And the image I've chosen is this rainbow slinky that I think could spice up the banner of my homepage. So I don't want to insert that image as is though. It's a pretty large image and I probably want a smaller width for mobile users and maybe a WebP version so that it's more optimized. And to optimize it, I'm going to use a utility called the Eleventy image plugin. This is something that Eleventy gives you out of the box to take in a source image like our rainbow slinky and turn it into a set of images with different widths and formats so that we can serve the right version depending on your device. So I'm going to configure that here as a shortcode, as they recommend you do. And it's a simple definition. It's called image. And if you remember our definition of a shortcode from earlier, it's just a function that takes in a set of properties, the source, the alt, and a set of sizes and widths for different devices. And it'll pass those properties to the Eleventy image plugin. And this will go on our file system and generate a few different images of those different sizes at build time. And that's the beautiful thing about shortcodes. Since they're guaranteed to run at build time, we can do things like file system calls. And then with the output of that, we get this little metadata object of all the images Eleventy made, we can pass those to another utility that takes in those images and spits out a beautifully formatted picture element that we can insert as a string of HTML into our document to load the right images depending on the browser that you're using. So with all of that explained, let's go ahead and see this guy in action. I'm going to head over to my index from earlier, and I'm going to call on this shortcode function using nunjuk syntax. This is something that Eleventy helps you with, where you can use nunjuks inside of your markdown. And we're going to call on the image plugin. We're going to pass it the source and alt. And we're going to use these little curly braces to turn that string of HTML into a little nunjuks template to put onto our page. So if we head back over to our browser, we can see that beautiful Slinky appearing on our page. And inspecting the element, we see it's reaching for a number of images of different sizes and formats in a nicely formatted picture element for our browser to choose the right one. And each of these files was generated at build time using the plugin. And we can see all of those sizes here in JPEG and WebP glory. So that's awesome. We figured out image optimization from a shortcode. Now let's try transporting the shortcode to all of our templates, because remember, it's a string of HTML, which should be supported by any templating language that you can imagine. So here, I'm going to run that same shortcode inside of a JSX template. This is something that Slinkity helps you with, where we pass the shortcodes to your page as a prop. And you can call on those shortcode functions, like so. And this will generate an image component. This is going to take in the string of HTML that the image generated and turn it into some JSX that we can add to our page, the same way we're using those percent signs to convert to a nunjuks template earlier. And to pass in the properties, as you might imagine, they're just component properties, where I can say image, and then the source and the alt text, and insert it as another element. Head back over to React page templates, and we can see that same beautiful Slinky being rendered onto our page. So if you're wondering, how the heck did you turn a string of HTML into a React component? Well, that's something that Slinkity's plugin ecosystem is helping us with here, where we allow you to configure any component framework that you want to support in your project. One that we give you out of the box is React, of course, where it'll teach how we can render React to a template and how to hydrate it on the client, which we'll demo in a bit. But it also has a utility to turn a string of HTML into a component. So here we have component from HTML, which is referencing this static HTML file here, which takes in the string of HTML that our shortcode gave us, and it wraps it with a React element. Here we're using React's create element, creating a Slinkity fragment. This could easily be like a div as well. And then setting the inner HTML to that string that our shortcode gave us. So I kind of call this the component sandwich, where we have the bread on the outside, which is our JSX wrapper, and then the meat on the inside, which is that inner HTML. And we can see that output in our browser, as you might expect. We see the Slinkity fragment right here with our picture sandwiched inside. So this is kind of what I see the future of shortcodes being, where it's a way to do something at build time, generate some beautiful markup that we can add to our page without shipping JavaScript, and then we can transport that to our favorite templating language. So instead of creating like the React image component, we can create the image shortcode for everyone to use. So I hope that excites you, and I want to leave you with sort of where I could see shortcodes going in the future, because they don't just have to generate markup, do they? They could also generate script tags or style tags or anything that a document could render. So here we've created a partial hydration shortcode. This is called React, and it takes in the path to a component on our file system, like this slinky.jsx here, and it takes that component and server renders it to some output on our page. Head back over to home and we can see our server rendered Slinky. And if we want to make it interactive, we can opt in to adding a little script tag to the bottom of that string of HTML. And this is going to hydrate our component. This is an approach called Islands Architecture if you've used a tool called Astro before. Very similar approach, but now we're doing it from a shortcode. So we can generate this beautifully hydrated component from any templating language that we want. We're using the percent signs here for nunjuks, but you could imagine shortcodes in a Vue template, a Svelte template, a React template to combine any component with any other component framework, all with the power of partial hydration. So if that future excites you, I definitely recommend checking out the slinkity.dev project. We have a lot of features coming down the pipe, of course, and we would love to have you as a contributor and as a user. And if you want to get weekly updates as we build everything out and approach a beta version, you can check out our Twitter, where I'll be posting weekly videos with my whiteboard to explain what we have going on. So I hope you enjoyed the talk and enjoy the rest of your time at the Jam.